Morning, everybody. And morning to you in Nipawa as well. Thanks for joining us here. We are in week 3 of the SCARS series. In case you missed the first 2, let me bring you up to speed on our approach. Our idea is that if you're suffering from something, if there's something that's gone wrong in your life, and somebody comes along and says, "Me too," that is helpful to different degrees. In one sense, it's helpful if it's legitimate, right? Like they've actually gone through this, they are going through it, and together you can commiserate, misery loves company, but there's also an empathy that happens there, where you feel like you're maybe sharing the burden, but the problem is, neither of you knows a way out. So you might feel better, but it's not going to feel better for long because it's not going to get better. There's no victory there. You're both going to bleed together, and eventually it just kind of ends. You bleed out, so to speak. But then there's another kind of me too. And I bet you've experienced this. Somebody comes along and they say, "Oh, wow, okay, wow, me too. I get that." And you're initially skeptical because they don't seem like they're bleeding in the same way you are, but that's because they've scarred. So they've healed in some sense. They can actually understand what you're going through, bear your burden, but they can also lead you through to victory and hope and a new beginning. And our series leading into Easter is about the Jesus of the scars, the Jesus who is victorious and empathetic, who comes alongside you and has suffered in every way that you have, and comes alongside you and says, "Me too," and is able to not just empathize, but brings you to a place of healing because of his victory. First week, we looked at Adam, and his wound was shame, and Jesus came along with his scars and brought Adam out of his shame. And the second week, we looked at Cain, and Cain was jealous. God brought him out of that. But both of them, the real wound has been trust. They aren't able to trust God, and Jesus helped them with that. Today, we're going to look at Jacob. Jacob is a real prominent figure in the Bible. He gets a ton of ink in the Bible. So Adam, we have to guess a little bit about. Like, we don't know anything about Adam's personality. Right? We don't know what he would find funny or what he would, did he have a short temper, that kind of thing. We don't really know. Same with Cain. We know about an incident in his life. But in the case of Jacob, we actually know quite a bit about him because there's a good chunk of the book of Genesis at the beginning of the Bible that's about him. And he is like the most manipulative, controlling character in the Bible. But before we're too hard on him, I want us to see that we are all born and bred, in a sense, to be controlling and manipulative. It starts really early in life. I was thinking about the first moment where I remember manipulating somebody. I'm sure it happened beforehand. This is the first one that I remember. Didn't want to go to school. Normally, my mom didn't fall for it. I'm about 6 years old. Now, if Dad left and I managed to stay home, I didn't have to go to school because he was my ride. So I had to just moan and wail and really communicate that I was very sick before Dad, or until Dad left, and then I could suddenly recover and have a very good day, right? So I managed to pull that off, and on the A-team, remember the A-team? Yes. Whenever a plan went really well, Hannibal, the leader, would kind of go like this and say, "I love it when a plan comes together." So my dad, I remember I'm sitting on the couch looking out the front window of the trailer, his old blue truck drives away, and I didn't know my mom was behind me, and I go, "I love it when a plan comes together." I hear this, "What did you say?" And it's like, nothing, I'm just remembering this TV show I like to watch where the guy says that. Anyway, and I don't know that it's ever stopped for me. I don't know that it's ever stopped for you, if we're honest. I don't want us to miss that this sermon is about us, that we are all control freaks. Here's some ways we attempt to control. I'm like 8 for 12 on these. I offer them to you. Ways we attempt to control. Control reality so that we get what we need. Manipulate our surroundings and people so that we get what we think we want and need. One way we do it is to lower expectations. Don't demand too much of me. I won't demand too much of you. We'll just kind of settle. That's control. We can use intimidation. Maybe like physical intimidation because you're big, maybe some sort of physical connection because you're attractive. You can use emotional intimidation. We control things by refusing to commit, lack of vulnerability. We criticize things and hold them at arm's length. We are codependent. We tell someone we really need them, don't ever leave, please, I'd fall apart, that kind of thing. We can hide behind bureaucracy, controlling life by forms and files, because if we don't do it according to this process, what happens? We can have a sense of urgency. I can't look at that right now. I have to really quickly do this. Sarcasm is often control, giving somebody the silent treatment. Distracting yourself is a way of controlling things. I had a buddy said to me once, I can't sit by myself for too very long. I need to be distracted because I don't like what I start to think about and where my heart goes. It's trying to control. And then most subtly, I think, and maybe a unique thing for people in this room and in Nipawa, is we can try to control things with spiritual language. Manipulating other people because we're holier than them, or we know more than them, or we're the stronger one, or we're insightful, or God told us to do these things. So we are, all of us, control freaks, and the reason that we are is because life has taught each of us that we can't control much. And we're just scared little boys and girls that life has taught that you won't actually get what you need, and you won't actually get what you want, and things will be taken from you unless you somehow manage to pull it all together. So this isn't me being hard on us, because I don't think we're stupid to feel that way, and there's nothing that's necessarily, you haven't done anything wrong to feel like that. It's just a natural progression in your life of what's happened. Life does a good job of teaching us that we need to be scared. So we start to control, we start to get the things that we want and we need, and we get more scared because we're terribly poor at it. So now that we can all jump in the same car as Jacob and not feel foolish that we're with this control freak and we got to be careful about him, we understand that we're all in there and can play the same game. Let's get in the car with him and let's learn a little bit about him. I'm going to tell you lots about Jacob, and it's lots of verses, but I want you to get a sense of his life. I want you to get a sense of his home of origin. I want you to understand what his mom was like. I want you to understand what his brother was like so that you can see yourself in his story in kind of a unique way that we don't often get to do with some of the Bible characters that are maybe more one-dimensional. This one comes to us in 3D. So we're going to start at the very beginning when he's actually in his mother's womb with his twin brother. And they're wrestling inside. Here's the verse. But the two children struggled with each other in her womb. So the mom is Rebecca. She's got two babies. She goes to the Lord and says, "Why is this happening to me?" She asks. And the Lord told her, "The sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve the younger son." This is a cultural switch from back then. You weren't going back then, I wonder who's going to have more leadership gifts. I wonder who's going to take the reins. No, you didn't say that. It was, I wonder who's going to be born first, because that's the one who gets everything, does everything, is given everything. Told about a reversal happening here. And when the time comes to give birth, Rebecca discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. For the life of me, I always just see Elmo. I see a nurse like holding Elmo and like maybe smacking his bottom to make him cry. So Elmo was born first, and they named him Esau. The other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. This is very symbolic. So they named him Jacob. Jacob actually means grasper, grabber, control. Right from the get-go, there's the symbolism in his life that he is somebody who is going to try to take things. Isaac was 60 years old. This is the dad when the twins were born. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Sometimes this visually can give us the idea that Isaac is this, or Esau rather, is this robust outdoor, like really physically intimidating guy, and Jacob is maybe the nerdy guy, kind of programming at home. Jewish legend actually has Jacob as being a giant, and we're going to see later on some of the things he does. It makes sense that they would think this way. Jacob is, for our purposes this morning, we can understand him as being not Esau's physical lesser. Isaac loved Esau, so the dad loves the oldest son because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Can anybody enter into this story at this point? Dad has a favorite and mom has a favorite, and everyone kind of knows. So enter the story at this point if that's you. One day when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrives home from the wilderness exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, "I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew." This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. "All right," Jacob replied, Jacob the grabber, the conniver, "but trade me your rights as the firstborn son." Inheritance in those days, we would use our word inheritance, is very different. If your parents are equitable, most of us would say, all things considered, for the most part, if you have 3 kids, you divide your estate into thirds. 2 kids, half, that kind of thing. Never occurs to ancient cultures like this. They're set up as the firstborn, probably like 95%, and everybody else would split the 5%. I'm making up those percentages, but you get the idea of how it's like. And Junior doesn't get to go, "Oh, this is so unfair," and he doesn't get to go to a lawyer, and he doesn't have his friends being sympathetic, because this is just how it is. So what he's doing here is he's coming and he's saying, "I'll give you this stew if you give me that." Now, it's the kind of sort of silly thing that a younger brother does to an older brother, and it might not mean anything, but nevertheless, it happens here. And it seems to mean something. "Look, I'm dying of starvation," said Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" Jacob said, "First you must swear that your birthright is mine." So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some of the bread and lentil stew. So it wasn't even good stew, it was like bean stew. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left. He showed contempt for his rights as firstborn. So we've got, in this first block of teaching here, you have the grabber already symbolically holding on. He's like he wants to get out of the womb first. He's yanking on his brother. And this prophecy about what he's supposed to be, destiny-wise, but he's not given the things that would take him there. And then he's conniving to get it. Years go by. The dad has fallen ill and is almost blind. So there's the birthright that Jacob wants, but there's also the blessing. The blessing comes from the father in this culture, and it really establishes destiny. Hard for us to understand, because we live in a reality where if somebody says things, you sort of decide, am I going to take that? I can filter that, right? It's not actually going to shape my destiny, really. If I'm strong enough, I can resist it. In their worldview, the words of blessing are irrevocable and meaningful and establish trajectory. Jacob wants this blessing from his father because he wants the life that the blessing will ensure he has, and he does not want it to go to Esau. And his mom does not want it to go to Esau, and they've been conniving behind the scenes of how to fool the old man so that he gives the blessing to Jacob and not Esau. They've decided that they're going to put furry patches on Jacob so that he can fool his dad. His dad will feel him. They've used hunting spray on the guy so he smells. Is hunting spray a thing? Not really. It is a thing, okay. What is it? Is it like urine? Okay. That's what I was scared of. Probably didn't spray him with urine, unless Esau's got issues that the text doesn't tell us about. So Jacob and Rebekah are conniving to steal this thing. And we'll pick it up about halfway through the process. Jacob goes closer to his father, and his dad Isaac touches him. His dad says, "Now the voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's." Right? He's got the fur on them. He didn't recognize Jacob because Jacob's hands felt hairy, just like Esau's. So Isaac prepared to bless Jacob, but it's like he knows something's off, and he says, "Are you really my son Esau?" "Yeah, I am," Jacob replied. Then Isaac said, "Now my son, bring me the wild game, let me eat it, and I'll give you my blessing." So Jacob took the food to his father. Isaac ate it. He also drank the wine that Jacob served him. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come a little closer. Kiss me, my son." So Jacob went over and kissed him. And when Isaac caught smell of his clothes, he was finally convinced. I mean, our noses work that way, right? You just have these memories that come back and that you associate with relatives that are long gone, or high school friendships or sweethearts that are long. I mean, a smell just brings it back. And so there's this convincing thing for Isaac. It's like, the smell of my son is like the smell of the outdoors, which the Lord has blessed. Then he unleashes a blessing on the wrong kid, but he's hitting send here and he can't take it back. From the dew of heaven and the riches of the earth, may God always give you abundant harvests of grain and bountiful new wine. May many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. May you be the master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. All who curse you will be cursed, and all who bless you will be blessed. That sounds really good and is, but have you ever snuck your way to something and it only increased the gap inside of you where you're like, now I should be this, and people think I'm this, but I know I'm this, and so you're even more fearful. You're even more fearful of missing out because now Jacob's got this being offered to him and he's going to miss out on it unless he connives and tries harder, etc., etc. When you're scared and when you need to manipulate, good things that come your way actually don't stop that. They make it worse because now you're going to lose them or you may not be able to hang on to them. And so you get more and more scared and it turns into sleepless nights. It's funny when you read Jacob's story, there's a pattern of sleepless nights. Esau predictably gets pretty ticked off. Jacob has to flee. So on his fleeing, he has this experience. Meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and traveled towards Haran. At sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp. Running from his brother, he's tired in the evening, find some shelter, that kind of thing. He's going to camp. Stop there for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. As he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth up to heaven, and he saw the angels of God coming up and down on the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, God. And he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, the God of your father Isaac. The ground you're lying on belongs to you. I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and the east, to the north and the south, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. We're not going to get into it this morning, but that's talking about us. We're blessed through Jacob. What I want you to see just quickly is that Jacob didn't earn this. This is just given to God. He's actually on the lam for having committed a crime, so to speak, and God meets him and blesses him. It's always good when we find places in Scripture that we see how God blesses without us earning it, that we just pointed out. What's more, and this is a really beautiful part of the blessing from God to Jacob, I am with you, my presence, and I will protect you wherever you go. The presence and the protection. Now, I was almost tempted to just stop here because I think there's some of us in the room that's all we need. You just need to know that when you belong to Jesus, you are promised this protection and you are promised this presence wherever you go. And if you're able to just simply accept that and receive that and live in that trust, you don't have to control. But most of us are like Jacob. It's hard to just receive this gift and have it sink in. Jacob is told this, and it doesn't land in him a way that really seems to develop trust. You'll see what I mean in a second. Having been promised the presence and promised the protection, the Lord continues. One day I'll bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I finish giving you everything I've promised you. Then Jacob made this vow. If God will indeed be with me and protect me on this journey, and if he will provide me with food and clothing, and if I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will certainly be my God. Does this strike you as a man who's been blown away by the presence of God and can trust him in new ways now? No. He's still bargaining. Even in the face of the one who's out to bless him, didn't give him conditions. God's blessing wasn't, if you this, then all this, if you this, then all this. But Jacob turns around and he's still hiding. He's still manipulating. Doesn't seem to sink in. It's going to take something special for Jacob to stop being a grasper. It's going to take something very unique that will stop him from controlling. Let's skip to the next block of teaching, Aaron. This is Jacob here now moving from that place where he had the nap or stayed up all night and God talked to him with the ladder. Now he's moving to his relative's house and he's looking for a wife. And I just want you to see something here. I want you to see how big and strong he is and conniving as well. He comes across this well and finds out that eventually that it's his relatives and it's this girl that he's going to end up wanting to marry. And there's all these shepherds around, but they're waiting to water the sheep because the stone on top of the well that keeps it safe is too heavy for anything less than a group of shepherds to all kind of 1, 2, 3 heave it off. We can't water the animals until all the flocks have arrived. Then the shepherds move the stone from the mouth of the well and will water all the sheep and goats. Jacob was still talking with them when Rachel arrived with her father's flock, for she was a shepherd. And because Rachel was his cousin, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and because the sheep and goats belonged to his uncle Laban, Jacob went to the well and moved the stone. There's a girl Jacob wants to impress. And so he goes, I'll just move this thing. This is important because we use all the tools that we have at our disposal to control reality, so it gives us what we need. And one of the tools at Jacob's disposal seems to be, in texts like this and in the Jewish legend, that he's got considerable size and strength. We'll fast forward again to the last thing I want to show you where he's manipulative. He's been working for his uncle. His uncle's treating him kind of bad, deceiving him, and they've got this feud going on. And his uncle sets up a deal with him that Jacob will get certain sheep and goats, and his uncle will get other ones. And Jacob isn't able to just trust and go, well, God will provide for me. He gets sneaky about it. And he does this kind of voodoo witchcraft type deal where he makes the animals mate in a certain spot that allows his flocks to be more fertile. I'll read it to you here. Whenever the stronger females were ready to mate, Jacob would place the peeled branches in the watering troughs in front of them, and they'd mate in front of the branches. But he didn't do this with the weaker ones, so the weaker lambs belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones were Jacob's. As a result, Jacob became very wealthy, large flocks of sheep and goats, female and male servants, and many camels and donkeys. What I wanted to show you in this is that he is manipulative and controlling, but he gets progressively more innocent at it. He gets progressively more forgivable. He gets progressively more, that's just life. We look at him and we're not as hard at him as when he fooled his dad. We just see him trying to make an honest buck. We don't see him terrified and fearful and trying to manipulate everything. We don't see the sleepless nights. We don't know what he thinks about. But you need to see that Jacob, living like this, is lonely. Because when you're driven by fear and you're a control freak, you don't actually have relationships with people. You just have pawns that you maneuver around to try and get from them what you want. And whether you're trying to get the blessing that God has promised you or you're just trying to survive, whatever your game is, when you're scared and controlling, you're going to be lonely. And the other thing is, you're just going to be scared. There's going to be things in your life that aren't letting you sleep. And it's spiraling. So like in our other services, we have this weird conversation where Jesus comes along. He stands next to Adam, or he stands next to Cain, and he says, "Me too." Let's do that with Jacob. Jesus comes along, sees Jacob, introduce themselves. The Jesus of the scars says to Jacob, "Me too." And Jacob goes, "Really? You're riddled with fear and you're a control freak?" And Jesus says, "Well, we won't start there. Let's start with your pushy mom. I have one of those. And I had stories told to me when I was little about who I was supposed to be and how I was supposed to deliver people and what it was supposed to look like. In fact, I was just at a wedding and she made me do something I didn't particularly want to do. Jacob's like, yeah, that's cute, Jesus, but we're not really getting to the heart of the issue here. Jesus says, okay, well, in the gap between the life that I want and the life that I was supposed to have and where I was, I felt the pressure, Jacob. I felt the pressure that you did. I felt the fear, and I felt the uncertainty of knowing how God's promises were going to be kept to me. And Jacob says, okay, that's interesting. Now we're getting somewhere. But Jesus, then, why did it turn out better for you? Why did you not get so paralyzed by it? Why did we get the sense that you were, when you wanted to, able to sleep, that you were surrounded by people that loved you, that people to you weren't just pawns, they were actually people that loved you and that you could love? And Jesus says, well, I didn't use the things that I had at my disposal to force and control what God had promised to give me. I trusted Him. When I was tempted in the desert, every one of those temptations was for me to use my divinity to make something happen. And I did not do it because I trusted God. Jacob says, easy for you to say. You are God. Jesus says, you're missing the point. Everything I did on earth, I did as a human being in the power of the Holy Spirit. And then Jacob starts manipulating. Well, Jesus, you must admit I'm getting better. I mean, that whole thing with Esau, that was a mess. But have you seen how I pray? Have you seen how I... And it goes back and forth a little bit, and then finally it gets weird. Jesus gives Jacob a shove. But not like a playful shove. It's like a little bit of an edge to it. Jacob doesn't know what to do, so he pushes back. And Jesus the carpenter pushes him back. And then Jacob pushes him. And then Jesus takes a swing at him. Then Jacob, it's on. And they start to go and they grapple and they wrestle and they wrestle and they wrestle, and it takes a long time. But then Jesus sort of pivots, moves quickly, grabs Jacob's hip and wrenches it out of socket. And Jacob has this idea that, wow, Jesus probably could have done this a long time ago. Why were we doing this weird wrestling thing? He had me in the palm of his hand this whole time. But Jacob lies there, can't wrestle anymore. All he's got left is to hang on to Jesus' ankle like he did his brother. And he says, who are you? Like, why are you doing this? Don't leave me this way. And Jesus says, I'm going to change your name. You spent your whole life wrestling with everybody, trying to control single thing, and it's driving you crazy. And the striving has not made you strong. You have missed out on your life. I'm going to give you a name that gives you your life back to you. You're no longer Jacob. You're Israel. You're no longer the grasper. Your new name is one who wrestles with God. It's not necessarily going to be a wrestle-free life anymore, Jacob, but at least you know who you're wrestling with. You're not manipulating people. You're only dealing with me. And when you walk and you limp along, you will remember that it's me. Now you're going, this dialogue took a weird turn. Jesus wrestling. I got it out of the next thing that happens in Jacob's life. Genesis 32. During the night, Jacob got up and took his two servant wives, and his 11 sons, and crossed the river with them. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. When you read that story, that's control as well. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." "What's your name?" the man asked. Jacob has to say deceiver and grabber and control freak. The man says, "Your name is not that anymore. From now on, you'll be called Israel. You fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, "I've seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury to his hip. The Jesus of the scars meets Jacob's wound, and he breaks the nice pattern we've established in the last 2 weeks. He doesn't make it all better in the way we might want him to. But in his wisdom and his love for Jacob and his deep desire to give Jacob his life back, he breaks him. He wounds him. He inflicts something on him that changes everything, because when you're a giant beast of a man and you manipulate people and every reflex is in that direction, unless when you start going in that direction something starts to hurt, you're never going to change directions. So God gives him this beautiful wound so that he can't pivot anymore and fight. Now, he can still wrestle, but it's going to be with God, because every time he moves, he's going to be, ouch, oh, right, yeah. Now, there are some of us in here who need that more than we need anything. We've been coming to God as this nice self-help equation where he fixes the things that we want, but that's just controlling him. And you need to have the vulnerability that would just say, break me and wound me so that I might change. Because I can't actually. I just keep bargaining. You have to do something that will take me deeper with you. And then there's some who, you don't need that. His touch needs to come to you differently. Not as a wound. You've been wounded enough. Sometimes Jesus speaks to us with words when he comes to us, sometimes images, and sometimes it's the physical presence of Jesus. And in Jacob's case, because of what he needed, what he got was a wound inflicted on him. That might be what you need. That might not be what you need. What you might need is a caress. There have been people in this room when they're singing who feel something gentle on their cheek as Jesus touches them. I know people who have felt like they're on the front their whole life and they're scared and they have to fight, and Jesus comes and his touch is like, let me just hide you behind me for a while. Maybe it's a touch of just like a sense that he's over top of you, protecting you. My point is, two things. May you have the courage to ask to be given whatever you need from Jesus without fear. Because if it's a wound, it's going to be beautiful and it will be what you need. But he's wise enough to know if it needs to be a little more tender than that. So whether it's a wound or it's a caress, I invite you to stand and sing about this Jesus who will come to you when you invite him. And my prayer is that he will make you feel something. Let's stand and let's sing together. Jesus, as we come to sing to you, would you be here physically present? We invite you to be here to touch, to heal, to shelter, to hide, and yes, even to wound, that we might become people who live in the destiny you've given to us without strain. That you would break our need to control and help us to trust you. Amen.